Hi, good evening, everybody. If you could just bear with us until 6:30, we'll start at 6:30 with the presentation. We're just going to let everyone arrive in the meantime, so please just bear with us. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Numbers are still going up quite quickly. So Jonathan, I think if we give it another minute, because say we've just gone over 400 now, and as I say, the number's still climbing quite quickly.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Good evening, everybody, and thanks for joining us tonight for our webinar on the challenges of delivering a charging network for the vehicles of tomorrow. I'd like to thank you all for joining our talk tonight, hosted by the IET Essex Network, and I'm pleased to welcome Tim Nicklin from Ford Motor Company, who's the manager of the Ford Blue Oval Charging Network. So before I hand over to Tim, just a few admin type things. There'll be an opportunity at the end of the session for you to ask questions, but if you could post all your questions into the Q&A box, that'll be much appreciated. And we'll be sifting through the questions as the webinar progresses, and then pulling out questions at the end to ask Tim. Please don't use the chat box. Please put all your questions in the Q&A box. Towards the end of the lecture, or the end of the webinar, I'll be placing a link into the chat box to our IET Essex Network community page, where in a day or two you'll be able to find a CPD certificate showing you've done 1 hour of CPD training from attending this webinar. If you've got any other problems or questions, then please put them into the chat box and we can try and resolve those as we go along. I think that's it. Over to you, Tim.
Okay, well, thanks very much. So, as has been said, my name's Tim Nicklin. I've been with Ford for over 30 years, and I tend to summarize my career as from low emissions to no emissions, because the early part of my career was associated with the environmental side of cars, of measuring pollution and fuel economy and improving cars to reduce those things in a world where we were concerned about acid rain or whatever else was the environmental concern at the time. But then more recently moved into the electric vehicle space. Personally, I've driven electric vehicles for the last 15 years. So I've managed to turn a personal interest in electric vehicles into a career in initially electric vehicle development and later into services for electric vehicle owners. So the topic this evening is around the challenges of delivering a charging network for the vehicles of tomorrow. But forgive me as a car guy that I'll talk vehicles first, and then I'll talk about the charging network. So I guess as Ford, then our current electric vehicle product is the Mustang Mach-E, which is our first long-range electric vehicle. We have various configurations of this vehicle available. We have two battery sizes. We have a choice of all-wheel drive or rear-wheel drive, which gives up to 379 miles on the legal cycle, WLTP. See, that's a fairly ideal conditions type thing, but you can beat the cycle. In fact, I met the team last year who had completed John O'Groats to Land's End twice with only one charging stop on each occasion. So you can, driven cautiously, beat 379 miles. But nevertheless, it's a very usable electric vehicle, which I certainly enjoy the opportunity to drive. But of course, consumers don't necessarily have the positive experience of electric vehicles that I've had over the last 15 years. So it's clear that at times consumers have issues about electric vehicles. Sometimes that's down to a lack of understanding about making the transition to using electric vehicle. Sometimes it's because they're poorly served by infrastructure. Sometimes they choose inappropriate infrastructure. So there are a number of challenges that customers face around using electric vehicles. And those challenges would include a diverse range of factors. But for example, seasonal range variation. So all vehicles, petrol, diesel or electric, the range of all those vehicles varies seasonally. And in our climates, typically that means the winter is the challenge. But of course, for most cases, the customer doesn't really notice the seasonal range variation. So despite the fact that the air is denser in the winter, so the aerodynamics are worse and there's more friction in the oil and more friction in the tires, customers don't really notice that. But of course, the main thing about driving in the winter from an electric vehicle is heating. Petrol, diesel vehicles are, my colleagues will be reluctant for me to say, but they're relatively inefficient compared to an electric vehicle. And that means in a petrol or a diesel vehicle, you have a lot of waste heat generated by that internal combustion engine, which you can use to warm the cabin. In an electric vehicle, it's much more efficient. It has very little waste heat. And therefore, if you are using heating, in addition to the impacts of friction and air density and all of the rest of it, in an electric vehicle, you've got the heater is directly consuming the electricity, so that directly compromises the range of the vehicle. So there's more seasonal variation with an electric vehicle than there is with a petrol or diesel vehicle. And that's one of the things that customers have to manage in terms of their expectations of what they can achieve in a vehicle before they recharge. We also have a somewhat confusing landscape of different and incompatible electrical connectors. That situation is a lot better now than it was a few years ago. We are largely now standardized in Europe on the Type 2 connector and the CCS2, the ones on the far right of my chart. But there are still vehicles around that use older connectors, whether that's the Type 1 or the J1772 AC connector, or vehicles that charge using the CHAdeMO, which is the Japanese standard connector. We also see in some European markets a third type of AC connector. And then, of course, there's the uniqueness of the Tesla connector on a number of models, prior models of Tesla vehicles, which, while it may look like a Type 2 connector, has geometrical differences and is used for DC. So a customer can be faced with a wide range of connectors which are not necessarily compatible with their vehicle, and which will potentially deliver a very different charging experience. So in extreme, for example, a poor choice of charger could make the difference between 30 minutes charging the battery and 2 days charging the battery. And again, many customers need help to understand the most appropriate sort of chargers to select for a particular need. So, you know, if you were doing a long trip, you would be looking for a higher power DC connector so that you can minimize your time at the motorway services or wherever you choose to stop before moving on, and potentially be running at 50, 100, 150 kilowatts charging the vehicle. Whereas if you're going to be leaving the car at the station all day while you commute into town, then you would not be looking for something so powerful, and you may well be content with 7 or even 3 kilowatts if it's just a case of topping up the vehicle to recover the what you use to charge the vehicle on. So there's a diverse range of connectors for different purposes. And of course, that's completely unlike petrol stations, where none of us really care how fast a petrol pump pumps. But in an electric vehicle world, you have different performance from different sorts of electrical connectors for good reasons. Obviously, if a customer makes inappropriate choices, it can be very time consuming to undertake a long journey, and you've mistakenly chosen the 2-day charger rather than the 30-minute charger. There's the frustration of encountering broken equipment, and it wasn't that long ago that a lot of the equipment on our motorway services was maybe broken or didn't work properly with all brands of vehicle, or all sorts of issues, and people were getting very frustrated that they turn up and equipment wouldn't be available, and maybe there weren't many options to go elsewhere if the equipment wasn't working. We also have the complexity of paying for charging. Certainly in my 15 years of driving electric vehicles, I've accumulated a wallet full of cards from different charge point operators. I have in excess of a dozen apps on my phone, and that doesn't allow me to charge everywhere. So there's that whole complexity of do you have an appropriate payment solution to use the charging equipment? Some of that has been alleviated in recent time because increasingly DC charge points have contactless payment. So you can just tap your credit or debit card and pay, but they don't all. And even if you make use of contactless payments, you've then, in many cases, got some faff about to get receipts if you're in a fortunate position that your travel is reimbursed by your employer, because you may then have to navigate to find the website of the person who operated the charging equipment to register and then get your receipt. And it's frankly all a bit of a pain compared to presenting a debit or credit card or a fuel card at a petrol station, being presented with your receipt and job done. So long before we actually decided what the form of our long-range electric vehicle was going to be as Ford. We recognized that if people were going to do long-range journeys, they needed a better solution than what was presently available. And that led us to create Ionity. So I'm going to talk a bit about Ionity. And really, you can consider providing an electric charging network as being two parts. There's a part which is about being a charge point operator and owning equipment in the ground, or maybe not owning it, maybe the equipment's owned by the people who own the ground, but you provide the connectivity for that charging equipment. And there's a second piece which is about being a mobility service provider, which is about owning customer accounts and providing those customers with access to charging equipment and giving them apps and tools and whatever else. And Ford kind of plays in both spaces, but chronologically it was Ionity first, which is the charge point operator part of the thing. So we recognize that if you're going to be doing long range journeys, we've got an electric vehicle which has a battery capacity of the order of 100 kilowatts hours, then you need a step up in terms of charging equipment. You know, even a large amount of the charging equipment, even at the relatively high power stuff, is 50 kilowatts. It can therefore, even without the real effect of the charge point turning down the power over time, you're going to fill a 100 kilowatt hour battery from a 50 kilowatt source. It's going to take you a while, and that's probably unacceptable in terms of a motorway journey. And therefore we recognize the need to create something that was more powerful, something that was more of it, that was more reliable, to support customers to undertake the longer journeys that we expected they would do in our, at that stage, not yet created, a long-range electric vehicle. And a number of other car manufacturers we discovered were thinking along similar lines. And so Ionity was founded back in 2017 for BMW, Daimler, selling as Mercedes in the UK, and VW Group got together, put money into creating this Ionity network with a plan to create 400 sites across Europe for electric vehicle charging. So we're not talking about single charge points. We're talking about hubs with multiple chargers on the strategic road network across Europe to enable long distance travel. So there are various, as you start to look into that, there are various issues that you face in providing the sort of service that the shareholders are wanting to do. And for a time, I did quite a bit of consultancy with Ionity and used to spend time at Ionity's European office fortnightly. So worked very closely with Ionity as they were initially staffing up to create the network. Lots of issues in building up such a network. So the nature of what Ionity is seeking to do with supporting long-range travel means securing sites on or very near major routes, such as the UK motorway network. But it has been the case that that looks like a virtual monopoly with a single party operating most of the charging equipment on motorway services, historically not delivering good levels of customer service, and fiercely defending their position on those motorway services. So it becomes quite a challenge to find suitable sites to develop this sort of network. Then the next part, of course, is if you think you've got a suitable candidate site, if you are have limited aspiration, you may well be able to attach the charging equipment to the supply that already serves the site. So if you have a modest demand for 250 kilowatt chargers, you may well be able to run that off a substation that already delivers the power for that motorway services. However, if you're more like Ionity and you're looking to deliver a bank of high power chargers, you're looking for more in the order of 2 megawatts. You potentially need your own transformer. You need to secure a connection and adequate power to your transformer, your own substation effectively, running your charging facilities. And so your lead time can be measured in years to get 2 megawatts to a particular site. And of course, as a commercial business, that's not like a householder where much of the reinforcement is amortized amongst costs of other householders. If you want 2 megawatts, you will pay us potentially a significant amount to bring 2 megawatts to a field near a motorway somewhere in the UK. So it becomes a really expensive undertaking to do this, and we'll see exactly how expensive this gets as this progresses. If you're playing in Ionity's space and you're looking to deliver very quick charging to people who are en route to somewhere else, then you know to be thinking about the on-site facilities. You know, if for most charge point operators, you may be, you know, if you're equipping the station car park or the shopping centre or wherever else, you don't really have to worry about the facilities because you're equipping a destination. People will be moving on to the restaurant, the cinema, to work, catch the train, and you don't need to worry about those things. However, if you're in Ionity's space, you don't really want to be sending people to some industrial estate near a motorway where there are no facilities and people lock themselves in the car and hope optimistically that no one will come and rap on the window while they're sat there in the dark charging the car, because there are no facilities. You want it to be, you know, bright, populated with food offer, cloakrooms, seating, Wi-Fi, etc. So all the other things to be a nice experience for the 20, 30, 40 minutes that you're going to be there while your car charges and you carry on your onward journey. And then if you've met all of that, if you're wanting to create a credible network, then you need to be thinking about separation. You don't want to have too many sites that are too close together, because that's not a good use of your investment. And so Ionity notionally looks for about 75 miles between sites to create a network that works for customers to do long range journeys. Not, of course, that you'll be stopping at all of those sites, but you may arrive on the motorway network with a partial state of charge, having come cross country or something like that, charge, and then you may be doing 150, 200, 250 miles between charges as you undertake your long range journey. The result of all of that is the Ionity network that we have now. So Ford is a part owner. It's an enabler for long range journeys around Europe. It was set up with an ambition to create 400 hubs for electric vehicle charging. It's currently at 402 live hubs across Europe, with a further 29 under construction. There are typically between 4 and 6 charge points per hub, and in many cases the ability to expand as demand on the site increases. Each charge point is capable of delivering 350 kilowatts to the vehicle. And I'll put my hand up and say, as Ford, we do not yet have a vehicle that can take 350 kilowatts, but it means it's future-proofed for the future, and in successive product generations, the charging infrastructure has the capacity to deliver more performance for our vehicle. With Mackie, charging 10 to 80% is typically 38 to 45 minutes, depending on battery size on such a charger. Realistically, when I've undertaken trips, charging stops are typically 20 to 25 minutes. I did a round trip to Ellesmere Port on Merseyside the last weekend, and that was typical of the charging stops, nearer 20 than 40 minutes in order to do a long range journey. And we also offer discounted energy costs to Mackie drivers on that network as well. So quite a good product to help drivers, not just Ford drivers, to undertake those longer range journeys across Europe. Ionity has recently made further announcements of additional shareholders investing in the company, and a further round of investment of 700 million euros, which will create a network of 7,000 charge points over more than 1,000 sites within the next few years. So I think that is illustrating the level of investment that it takes, both in terms of the hardware, but also the network connections to run these large hubs that may be looking for 2 megawatts on a hub. So I know that some users seem particularly aggrieved that when they're asked to pay more for electricity on the public location than they are their electricity at home. Although the way domestic electricity rates are going at the moment, it's in some cases becoming cheaper to charge when you're out and about than to charge at home. But I guess public prices will catch up with the rise in the wholesale prices in time. But it is a huge investment to create these sorts of networks for public charging. So that's I referred to two pieces, if you like, the charge point operator part and the mobility service provider part. So Ionity is effectively Ford's charge point operator part, and then I'll move on to talk about the mobility service provider part, because of course just having access to those charge points would still be a relatively small offer on a European scale. So we move on to the BlueOval charging network, which is the mobility service provider part. So within the BlueOval charge network, we provide Ford customers with access to in excess of 250,000 charge points. We take charge points from over 250 different charge point operators, one of whom is Ionity, the Ford-owned one. We provide access to charging infrastructure in more than 25 countries through a single Ford account. So I referenced earlier the wallet full of cards that I possess, that I've accumulated over my 15 years as an EV driver, and the phone full of apps, and that not covering all the charge points in the UK by a long chalk. Imagine the complexity if you planning a foreign holiday where you wanted to drive through France to Italy, for example. How would you research where such charge points were, what tools you needed to use, who you needed to count with, all of that sort of horrible complexity, and all of that goes away with this sort of charging experience, because as you can travel anywhere in Europe on the BlueOval charge network, and it's just there. It works seamlessly as you move around Europe. So it's not just a good solution domestically, but also could take a lot of the pain out for those who have undertake longer trips in electric vehicles. Behind the scenes, although the customer has a single set of tools to use all of this, it is hugely complicated. So there's more than 250 charge point operators. We're actually close to having 300,000 charge points. So there's a huge amount of complexity in making all of that work from an IT perspective, which the customer doesn't really see. But we're connected through multiple clearing platforms. So to enable this world of mobility service providers like Ford talking to charge point operators like Ionity, you can connect charge point operators directly to a mobility service provider, but that's relatively heavy on IT. So in many cases, although we can connect people directly, mobility service providers connect through what are known as roaming platforms to different charge point operators. So there are a number across Europe. So Hubject, for example, provides a roaming platform with a German focus, but not exclusively in Germany. Similarly, Jurev provides that function in France, but not exclusively in France. There are a number of smaller national operators as well. So you end up with a complex structure some charge point operators who have a direct connection, other charge point operators who are connected through platforms. And we end up with more than 250 charge point operators and more than 20 in the UK who a Ford user can have a single account with Ford and pay at any of these charge point operators. But it's more than just payment. We provide a whole range of things to assist customers to have a painless, as far as possible, experience of using their electric vehicle. So like a lot of mobility service providers, we have an app, and our best known app is Ford Pass. So Ford Pass tells you about what charge points can do in terms of their capability. It tells you about the live availability of the charge point. Is it in use? Is it broken? Those sorts of things. We tell you what the price is. We tell you about the on-site facilities. Can you get tea, coffee? Is there a restaurant? Whatever else is there. We show you site photographs of the charge point itself, in some cases an aid to finding the charge point. And we give the facilities to start and stop the charge point in many cases. Those capabilities, in many cases, are integrated into the vehicle, so that from the navigation in the vehicle, you can see much the same information about charge points as you would directly through the app. We simplify the experience for the customer by showing them only connectors that are compatible with their vehicle and not all the other connectors that are legacy or compatible with other people's vehicles. We show only the power levels that can be achieved with our vehicle, because in some cases, you might arrive at a charge point and it says, oh, 43 kilowatts AC and 50 kilowatts DC. Well, the DC one's in use, so I may as well plug into the 43 kilowatts one, not realizing that there are almost no cars that can use 43 kilowatts AC. So in many cases, you may as well be connected to a 7 kilowatt charger as a 43 kilowatt charger. And so we help our customers to understand the actual power they will achieve. We allow a number of means for customers to start charge points. So in common with many charge point operators, we provide, mobility service providers, we provide our customers with a card or a fob, which they can tap on a charge point to initialize a charge point if it's in network. And that identifies the customer who will ultimately pay the bill, the charging event. In many cases, you can push a button within Ford Pass to turn on a charge point, and we will shortly be having the ability to start a charge point from in the vehicle as well. And we also do something called ISO 15118 plug and charge, which I'll more of in a moment, which is another way to pay without interacting with a charge point through an app or a card. We offer user accounts in 20 countries, so we have a lot of complexity around language to deliver user accounts in 20 countries, but we have a larger list of countries where you can use the charge points, even though we don't offer accounts to people in those countries, which we gradually, as we expand the service, we'll embrace more countries. But in the meantime, there are countries where you can charge when you're on holiday, for example, where you might not be able to get an account if you lived in that country. So in terms of activating charge points, then many customers have a charging card, which, as I said, you can just tap on a charge point that's in network in order to activate the charge point. Ford may well be unique in Europe, being a mobility service provider in its own right. So you'll see on the card, after the country code DE, there's FRD, and that is FRD because we only get 3 letters as Ford, the mobility service provider, and that means, which I think it's unique in Europe, that we can strike contracts with the charge point operators independently of any other partner, whereas many car manufacturers effectively buy the entire service in from a third party. So many charge points can be activated by the app. So we've got an example there of a screen you might see at a hub where you see a selection of charge points where you can pick the right one and activate that charge point. And then we've also got the 1511.8 plug and charge, as I mentioned as well. 1511.8 plug and charge is a really neat feature. Effectively, that places a encrypted digital certificate on the vehicle, which has encrypted within it a unique identifier for the customer. So that the certificate identifies that it's Ford is the provider of the certificate, and then Ford can identify once the charging event is received who is the bill payer who will settle that. So when you plug a compatible vehicle like a Mackie into a compatible charge point like Ionity's charge point, then the digital certificate is passed over the cable to the charge point, and that is used, that certificate is then validated to ensure that it's a real certificate and that the account is in good health, and then the charging will start without any need to use a card or interact with an app to authorize the charging session. And Ionity is the first network in Europe with 100% plug and charge capability. So this experience works on any of those 400 charging hubs, 403, I think it was, charging hubs across Europe. Then we've got the tools that we give to customers. So we have an app like many mobility service providers would, but we provide perhaps more information within our app than you would get with a third-party app, because we can integrate information about the vehicle into the, is in the app. Many petrol, diesel vehicles, the drivers will use Ford Pass as an app. So it's got information about the vehicle. You can get, state of charge, range. You can decide when you want your car to charge. You can see your charging history, all sorts of vehicle type stuff in it. You can do your public charging from it. You can search for charge points. You can pay. You can plan trips. We'll talk about a bit more about that in a moment or two. And you can also manage your home wall box through the Ford Pass app. So things like locking the wall box so people don't charge their cars while you're away at work, or sharing access to your wall box with family members, or seeing how much energy has been supplied by the wall box. All of those things can be done through Ford Pass. And again, in the European context, it's available in around 20 languages to support our diverse European customer base. So the sorts of things an electric vehicle driver would do as part of the charging network, got basic things like finding charge points. So you can find charge points and see a list of charge points that are nearby. You can look on the map as part of the POI, the point of interest in the map, to find charge points. You can filter that list. You want to find charge points that you can pay at through Ford, or charge points that are DC charge points because you want to charge quickly, or charge points near your grannies, or whatever. You can do all of those things via the app. We also provide a trip planner function, which I'll talk about more about in a minute. So you don't have to manually look for charge points near a route. The trip planner tool will help you find charge points along a route. So there's a whole bunch of filters there, and much the same filters are available in the interactive screen on the vehicle as well. The trip planner tool is intended for when you're doing a long distance trip, and it's about picking the best places to charge along the way. So it's quite clever. It predicts your state of charge throughout the journey, a feature that we call intelligent range. So that's a learned behavior about your vehicle, the way you drive in the current conditions, to predict the range and the state of charge that points through the journey. It understands the characteristics of battery charging, because generally high voltage batteries on vehicles do not charge at a fixed rate. You will typically experience a higher charge rate when the battery is emptier, and then as the battery gets fuller, the charge rate reduces. So the power reduces, the more kilowatt hours of capacity have been used in the battery. and the trip planner can combine those two functions to work out the best places to stop along your journey. So it's has that information, it looks for the power, and it works out the minimum charging time for your journey as you do that journey. So much in the way that a navigation system on a regular vehicle would look at congestion and find you a route that minimizes your journey time, taking into account the congestion. We minimize your journey time, taking into account not just congestion, but the charging time as well. So the vehicle will, the system will pick the best charging points for you to stop, and it will indicate to you to what state of charge you should go before you do your onward journey. Because, for example, if it was the case that you needed to take on board, 100 kilowatt hours of energy during the course of a journey to complete that journey, it's probably going to be the case that you save time with stopping for 2 50 kilowatt hour stops and 100 kilowatt hour stop. And Trip Planner will manage all of that for you, tell you what your target state of charge is to achieve to leave the site and what time that state of charge will be. And then when you leave the vehicle on charge at the location and you're sat in the coffee shop having your coffee, you can obviously monitor how well you're progressing with that. So see that your charging is in progress, that all is going well, and see that the state of charge that you've achieved. You have the ability to plan your journey in the vehicle, or indeed, as illustrated here, you can plan the journey on your mobile phone and then save it to the car. And then when you turn the car on, the car will identify it's been sent a new trip. Do you want to use that trip? So you can either pick it immediately off the screen, or the trip will be in a library of trips that you can select from at a later date. So if we illustrate that, for example, if I wanted to go to Aberdeen, which I've not yet taken a Mackie to Aberdeen, but should I want to do that, this is an example of its Trip Planner's analysis of that journey, which I did on a standard range all-wheel drive. So that's the shortest range Mackie. The longest range is the extended range battery rear-wheel drive. So it's recommended 3 charging stops at Leeds, Newcastle and Edinburgh on my way to Aberdeen. It's told me how long I should stop at each location, what state of charge I should aim to achieve, and that it'll take me a total of 1 hour and 49 minutes for charging in what is a 12-hour drive to get to Aberdeen. I personally tend to rely on the trip plan and just do what the computer says. But if I was fussier, then you can go in and you can review each of the charging stops. And if you want to, you can substitute another local charger for the one that's in the plan. But I personally found the trip plans very robust in terms of enabling me to do long range journeys, such as my round trip to Ellesmere Port last weekend. So very useful tool and a great complement to the regular search tools. And of course, this is an example of the sort of things that we can do as an OEM to help the customer, which doesn't work quite so well with a third-party app, because we've got the model of the vehicle, the real state of charge, and we understand the detail of how that vehicle, potentially with you, the driver, is performing in terms of the range that you get with the levels of heater use at that time of year and all of those sorts of things. That will be further enhanced. So I was in the meeting earlier reviewing enhancing that for trailer tow, for example. So as people start to tow trailers in an electric vehicle, having the ability to learn the characteristics of the trailer and then to refine the trip plan based on the trailer characteristics. Of course, that's not the end of it with Mackie. As ever with car manufacturers, there's very little I can say about future models, but we've already announced the the Transit. So I haven't brought one home yet, and it certainly won't fit in my garage. But my team has an e-Transit as we seek to refine the charging experiences for a very different category of vehicle. And then beyond this, there are obviously other electric vehicle products, charging products, to allow our customers to have make an easy as we can transition to a world of electric vehicles by providing a advanced range of connected tools to help people to use those vehicles. So we've sought to take the stress out of EV charging compared to some of those newspaper reports I illustrated at the beginning of people who've been caught out with their electric vehicles. So we have, intelligent range. If you go on user forums, you get people talking about the guessometer or the GOM in terms of the range indication of an electric vehicle, because many drivers do not believe the numbers that their car tells them. And we've sought to address that with this intelligent range, which is a very sophisticated way to predict the range of the vehicle. We've invested in the charging network Ionity for long distance travel, even before we decided what form our long range electric vehicle would take, because it takes years to develop such a thing, particularly with the securing network connections, for example. We built a wider charging network as a mobility service provider that gives our customers the widest possible coverage in terms of paying for charging both at Ionity and at the 250 plus other charge point operators within the network. We've done a lot to integrate those tools into the vehicle, so it's not just about an app, it's comprehensively into the vehicle, so you can interact with it as you use the vehicle. And we've also built it all into an app alongside vehicle information like state of charge and home charging wall box information. And the different components of that, of course, can all share information with each other to optimize the user's experience compared to where you might have been previously with a car app and a separate public charging app and something else to control your wall box, which is all a bit of a pain in the neck when you try and move back and forward between different apps and maybe wish that something from one app was available in the other. With Ford Pass, it's all integrated together. And then, of course, we've also potentially the first manufacturer to have a range of cars, all of which were ISO 15118 capable, to match Ionity's announcement of their 100% capability last year. So activating charge points becomes really straightforward. And obviously we're hoping that more and more charge points will, or charge point operators will adopt this standard. So there's less and less concern about, have you got the card? Has your wife got the card? Is it in the car? Have you got the phone? Is the battery in the phone okay? Etc., etc., etc. Because it just happens when you plug in through Plug and Charge. So I think I'm done presentation-wise at that point. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Tim. Very interesting. So we've got lots of questions for you. So perhaps I can hand over to Rob, who's been prioritising some of the questions.
Yep, thanks everybody, and thanks Tim for an excellent presentation. We've got, as I was saying, quite a lot of questions. There may well be some that are similar, so I will try and summarise some of them. First one is about PV glass. Any plans to incorporate that into vehicle windows?
I'm not aware of plans to incorporate into to vehicle windows. I'm aware that some manufacturers do have solar panels in the vehicle structure, for example, but I'm not aware. That's not my thing.
Okay. Okay, so with the next one, I think has been answered about standardising connections. It's ongoing, and there is an ISO standard when everybody complies with it.
Yeah, so I think they say that's largely a done deal. So
Yep.
In the European context, it's the Type 2, which is a 7-pin connector that allows for 3-phase in markets where 3-phase is common. And then you can reveal in many vehicles 2 pins below, which is this one here, which are the separate DC pins. So commonly those pins are covered by a separate cover. But yes, that's very much the European standard now. And almost everything has those connectors to that standard now in new vehicles, that is. But of course, we've still got a population of older vehicles, and I'll put my hand up and say one of my electric vehicles uses an older connector. So there's still a demand for the older connectors as well for some time.
Yep. Yeah, another one, a comment about comparing efficiencies. We know that the losses are in the power station. We know that. Home charging an issue. Yes, we know that. However, the range for 2-wheel drive being continuously wet, requiring windscreen wipers, ambient around 5 degrees C, continuous heater, and air conditioning, how would that affect your range? Any ideas?
I believe worst case, and this is probably going beyond UK worst case, bearing in mind we sell cars in Scandinavia, but worst case, the range could halve in winter, but it's not typical of the UK experience.
Okay, that's useful information. Yeah, so another comment about history. Swapping batteries, is this a possibility?
Yeah, so battery swapping is an interesting one. So there was a project called Better Place some years ago, which built a network in Israel, and I think was in the process of building one in Denmark as well. And that was all based around battery swapping stations. And that didn't end well. So Better Place collapsed under the weight of debt, I believe. So there are some attractions to battery swapping. The immediate issue at the time, I think, has largely gone away because charging technology has improved enormously since Better Place. So you know, there are increasing numbers of vehicles like the Mach-E that can charge at 150 kilowatts, and therefore some of the case for battery swapping goes away. Of course, there are other opportunities around battery swapping. You know, maybe you have a small battery for day-to-day use and a bigger battery for holidays and those sorts of opportunities. But I think part of the cost of the Better Place was experienced, of course, was the investment in all of this battery swapping infrastructure meant that you actually ended up with large numbers of batteries waiting at battery swapping stations just in case someone came along. And actually the battery is one of the most expensive pieces of the vehicle. So it's not particularly efficient investment wise to have lots of spare batteries floating around just in case.
Yeah.
And then additional complexity, of course, is if, like many of us, you prefer to own your vehicle, you aren't necessarily going to be overly happy to keep swapping to some other battery to battery swapping station. Clearly, if the vehicle is leased or the battery is leased, and of course there have been people who lease the battery separately to the car, maybe your reservations are less. But I think increasingly the emphasis is on providing evidence around state of health of a battery to support residual value, rather than the risk that you might make a bad swap to some other battery.
Okay. Note the CPD certificate, everybody, has popped up. Question about motorcycles. Are you aware of anything for electric motorbikes?
Not really my thing, electric motorbikes.
Okay.
In principle, the infrastructure would work on electric motorbikes, although typically there is a relationship between charging power and battery capacity. So as you have a smaller battery, you naturally tend to reduce the charging power in order not to have excessive degradation. So maybe in some cases, the higher end of car infrastructure may not be appropriate for motorbikes because of if you delivered the full power of the infrastructure, you damage the battery.
Yeah.
So it may be more appropriate to use lower power equipment, but the more sophisticated bikes, I think, are compatible with car infrastructure.
Yeah, and the next one is about range, which we've already covered. Is there industry lobbying for improving the motorway experience, or is the ISO standard going to sort that in time? This is the
Okay. So I guess there's a bunch of pieces to that about improving motorway experience. So there is improvements to motorways ongoing because the previous operator in the UK of motorway services charging equipment has been taken over. So there is a lot more money going into the UK motorway services now, which is good. So hopefully the equipment will be a lot more reliable when that renewal process is completed by the operator of the equipment. But I guess the other piece of it is about having enough at motorway services to meet growing demand from electric vehicles. And that will depend on how much planning went into the request to the DNOs, because there the constraint will be about whether there is the power on the site to run much in the way of additional chargers, or whether there's going to be a significant lead time to get additional power to the site. So I remember some years ago talking to a guy from National Grid who had previously worked for a company developing wind farms, and his horror story was having a wind farm and waiting 10 years to connect it to the grid. Now, I've not come across anything quite that bad in electric vehicle charging, but you can still be looking at a plan that delivers the capacity you've requested over a number of years, rather than writing a check and next week somebody's out with a digger.
Yeah. Okay. Question about solar panels at these charging stations. Are there solar panels to assist with the power supply?
Lots do, or sort of say some do, but of course you need a whole lot of solar panels to cover the needs of a vehicle on charge.
Yeah.
So I mean, I've got solar panels here at home, and most of my roof has disappeared to deliver for something that delivers 4 kilowatts in ideal conditions, and that's a long way short of the needs of a car, particularly on a motorway. I mean, you can charge a vehicle, and I do charge a vehicle off my solar panels, but it charges pretty slowly.
Yeah,
it's good thing to do with your energy. But the reality is that many of the solar roofs that you might see at such things are a bit token, and what you actually need is a field on a sunny day, rather than a few panels in the roof over the charger.
hang on, my one has just jumped. I've got to go back to where I was. We've got an awful lot of questions here, everybody, so we're not going to get through most of these. There was a question that came up, I noticed something about competition in the supply. Is this an issue at the moment, or is the sort of diversity a problem rather than providing a good service to the customer?
Competition in supply of
The
charge points in public.
Yeah, charge point.
Yeah, so I mean there are loads of providers. So there are more than 20 operators of electric vehicle equipment in the UK. So you could look at that and say, well, that's probably more diversity than petrol stations. Yeah. But so there's competition in that sense. I think the area where there's perhaps less competition than there might ideally be is the motorway services, where, you know, there was, I guess, from the days before there was many people wanting to do electric vehicle charging on motorways, there are, you know, contracts already in place, and that becomes then a restraint on other people providing facilities on motorways.
Yeah. One thing has occurred, I'm sorry this is jumping around, it's because there's so many questions. The use of electric vans is obviously significantly different to personal use, whereas many will be, I think this is the point, used in lots of short journeys, like delivering Amazon parcels and so on. How are you going to cater for that sort of difference?
Okay, so yes, so vans is actually second closest to my heart in terms of electric vehicles, because of our, as I showed a slide earlier, our next electric vehicle is the full-size Transit, and a lot of those vehicles are used in delivery environments, whether that's Amazon or your local supermarket or whoever. So a lot of those vehicles are essentially depot-based vehicles. So they're looking at a different sort of charging solution where you try and minimize the demand for reinforcement to supply more power to a depot, but most of those vehicles will be depot-based. So then you're looking at a charge point range where potentially you want to have a lot of vehicles on charge simultaneously and still have the confidence that they'll all be charged by next morning when they're required. So although it's not my thing, we do have a depot solution for commercial vehicles, which we'll be launching imminently.
Right, okay, yeah. Much the same as the old milk float problem, I assume, isn't it?
Yes, although of course something like a full-size Transit takes a lot more power to charge than a milk float.
Yeah.
For size and speed and all the rest of it, and range, and etc.
Yeah. Hang on. Right. Anything about installation of all personal chargers I'm skipping over. What about pre-booking charging slots? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, it's something that we looked at. So we originally had a service in mind called Locate, Reserve and Pay. So we were quite serious about reserving. The difficulty is there are very few charge point operators who have the IT capability to deliver that at this time.
Right.
So it's quite hard, but we do see the attraction of being able to reserve a charge point. Having said that, it is a bit of a swings and roundabouts thing, because of course it's great for the person who reserved it sometime before they arrived at the charge point to have confidence that the charge point was going to be there. But for every person who's really happy with it, there's potentially somebody else who is frustrated because they've arrived at a charging location. There are charge points that are not actively charging vehicles, and yet they cannot charge because they didn't reserve.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a mixed blessing from a customer satisfaction perspective.
I think we'll pass over one question about HGVs. For developing EVs that compatible with V2G, not sure what that means.
So V2G is vehicle to grid,
Right.
which is part of a V2X, which is a wider range of reverse energy flow from the vehicle. So yes, in fact, I don't think it's a secret that the F-150 electric has reverse energy flow capability. So that's not a vehicle that's sold in Europe, but we do have a vehicle capable of V2H technically, supporting the home with a dedicated wall box for that purpose.
Yeah, okay. One thing here is, can the charging be disabled for uninsured, untaxed or assumed stolen vehicles?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's our role to police untaxed vehicles. Can charging be disabled? So we can disable the charging service. So if you believe that for example, you've lost your card, we can disable the charging service until you have got a new card or whatever the issue is.
Yeah.
I've never considered whether for a vehicle reported stolen, you could turn off the charging remotely. That's an interesting idea for a feature. I've not looked into that question previously.
Yeah, well, might be worth putting out a suggestion scheme.
Perhaps I can jump in, Rob, with a few questions. There was a question, Tim, about can the power network cope with charging all these extra vehicles? How's that going to be catered for?
Yeah, so that's perhaps more of a home charge question than a public charging question. But there are active steps being taken to sort that. So I guess you've got the classical reinforcement type stuff. But we're also, the UK is moving to a new standard for home chargers. So from the middle of the year, if you have a new home charger, then it either needs to default to charging hours which avoid peak load, or you need to be enrolled in a demand side response service. So that potentially then means that there is a means to manage charging if the grid is under particular stress. So which is, of course, classically early evening winters in the UK.
There was another one about the cost of charging. Maybe I missed it. Did you give any cost for like charging, especially with the increase in energy prices coming along? How much is it like? Does it cost now, or is it likely to cost to charge, for example?
Yeah. So yeah. Okay. So the cheapest, I think the cheapest charging on the Blue Oval Charge network is 30 pence a kilowatt hour, and I think the top end is 69 pence per kilowatt hour. And yes, we've definitely seen evidence of charge point operators putting up the price with the particularly challenging situation that there is at the moment with electricity and gas prices in the UK. So yeah, expect to see that. I think it's only reasonable to see that the prices will be going up, reflecting the general cost of electricity.
So to charge at the moment, to charge the Mackie, could cost between or from?
So I personally pay at home overnight 5 pence per kilowatt hour. What's that going to do? So a full battery is going to be about 100 kilowatt hours. So that's a £5 for a full charge. And if I got the published range, that's almost 400 miles. That is very cheap compared to petrol or diesel. But clearly my electricity is also particularly cheap compared to the UK average. And I think I'm going to face a big rise, like a lot of people, when my contract comes to an end.
Yeah.
And one final one for me was there was a question about like the impact of charging actually on batteries and the impact of like performance and degradation and.
Yes, okay, so there's a number of factors that cause a battery to degrade over time. So things like being held at a high state of charge for an extended period. So I would certainly recommend that. I mean, while I would have no issues fully charging the vehicle in preparation for a day when I want to use the full range of the vehicle, for most of the time, where your daily drive is only a fraction of the battery capacity, it would make sense to limit the state of charge. So I think our manual talks about 90%. for Mackie, and we provide tools to allow the driver to tune the target state of charge by location for a vehicle. DC charging can also degrade a battery, and the more power, the more degradation, but it is managed to reduce the impact to a customer over the life of the vehicle. But again, I would suggest that, you know, I think good practice would be not to DC charge unless you need to. Clearly, there are many of us are in the fortunate position that we can charge at home, and therefore most of our charging is AC and relatively slow, which is comparatively good for battery life. Of course, not everybody has the luxury of charging at home, and then you've got the effectively competition now opening up between people who will do charging in the street like Ubitricity, and people who see the future as charging hubs. And I guess you pay your money and takes your choice. But in terms of battery degradation, to charge slowly in the street is a better solution than to use a charging hub on a regular basis.
Okay, I think that sounds like a good point to leave. If I can thank Tim for an excellent presentation, and wish everybody good night, and thanks for your attention.
Yeah, thanks
Thank
very
you.
much, Tim. Yeah. Our next talk by the Essex Network will be on the 9th of March, industrial resilience to disasters. So join us on Zoom for that one. Thanks so much for attending tonight. Don't forget, if you want the CPD certificate, look on our website in the next few days. There will be a recording available of this event if you would like to look back, or if anyone you know missed it. We'll probably download the questions and we'll see if we can answer any ones we haven't answered. And that's it.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you everybody, and good night.